$64.8 billion. That is the staggering sum that evaporated into the winter air of Manhattan in December 2008, taking with it the life savings of thousands, the endowments of major charities, and the unshakable reputation of a Wall Street titan. When Bernard Lawrence Madoff gathered his sons in his luxury penthouse to confess that his entire investment advisory business was, in his own words, one big lie, he shattered a decades-long illusion of financial invulnerability. This was not a sudden market crash or a complex derivative gone wrong. It was a premeditated, systematic betrayal executed by a man who had once served as the chairman of the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, weaponizing his impeccable credentials to orchestrate the most devastating financial deception in modern history. The mechanics of this unprecedented illusion relied on a purported trading method known as a split-strike conversion strategy. Madoff claimed to buy a basket of large-cap stocks while simultaneously purchasing put options and selling call options to hedge against market downturns. On paper, it was a conservative, reliable way to generate steady, moderate returns regardless of market volatility. But forensic accountants later discovered that no such trades were ever executed. Instead, Madoff operated a classic Ponzi scheme, a fraudulent investing scam promising high rates of return with little risk to investors, where early backers are paid off using the capital contributed by newer recruits. To sustain this massive deception, the architect of the fraud cultivated an unparalleled aura of exclusivity. He did not advertise his advisory business. Instead, he relied on affinity fraud, targeting wealthy, tight-knit communities, country clubs, and philanthropic organizations where word-of-mouth recommendations carried immense weight. By routinely turning away potential clients and feigning disinterest in their capital, he triggered an overwhelming psychological desire among the elite to gain access to his secretive fund. Investors believed they were part of an exclusive club, blinding them to the reality that their money was merely being deposited into a Chase Manhattan bank account, never to be invested in the market at all. The architecture of the deception was further insulated by the proliferation of feeder funds. These were massive, pooled investment vehicles created by third-party managers whose sole purpose was to funnel billions of dollars directly into Madoff's operation. These funds extracted lucrative management fees from their own clients while completely outsourcing the actual investment strategy to the central firm. By inserting this layer of intermediaries, the operation distanced itself from direct scrutiny. The investors in these feeder funds often had no idea their money was ultimately controlled by one man, creating a dangerous concentration of risk masked by the illusion of diversification. Deep within the Lipstick Building in Midtown Manhattan, a stark, physical divide protected the lie. While the legitimate, technologically advanced market-making business operated on the 19th floor, the fraudulent advisory business was sequestered on the 17th floor. Here, a small group of complicit employees utilized antiquated IBM computers to generate millions of pages of fabricated trade confirmations and monthly statements. They retroactively selected historical stock prices from the previous month to engineer the exact, steady returns the firm had promised. The sheer volume of this fake dot matrix paperwork created a formidable barrier of data, overwhelming anyone who attempted to verify the transactions. Yet, the mathematical impossibility of these returns did not go entirely unnoticed. Financial analyst Harry Markopolos spent nearly a decade trying to expose the operation. Analyzing the purported split-strike conversion strategy, Markopolos concluded that the options market simply lacked the volume necessary to support the massive trades Madoff claimed to be executing. He submitted multiple, highly detailed dossiers to regulators outlining how the returns were either the result of illegal front-running or a massive Ponzi scheme. The warnings were explicit, mathematically proven, and delivered directly to the authorities. The failure of the Securities and Exchange Commission to act on these dossiers remains one of the most glaring regulatory breakdowns in financial history. The SEC conducted multiple investigations and examinations of the firm over the years, but repeatedly failed to perform basic due diligence. The comprehensive appraisal of a business undertaken by a prospective buyer or regulator to establish its assets and liabilities. Investigators accepted fabricated documents at face value and never took the fundamental step of verifying the trading activity with an independent clearinghouse. The agency's deference to a respected Wall Street luminary paralyzed their investigative mandate, allowing the fraud to compound exponentially. The catalyst for the scheme's unraveling was not regulatory intervention, but the catastrophic macroeconomic collapse of 2008. As the global financial crisis triggered a severe liquidity crunch, panicked investors across the world scrambled to withdraw their capital. Requests for redemptions at the firm surged to an insurmountable $7 billion. Because the operation relied entirely on the continuous influx of new capital to pay existing clients, the drying up of global liquidity exposed the fundamental mathematical flaw of the Ponzi structure. The vault was empty, and the illusion of endless prosperity violently collided with economic reality. The final days of the operation were defined by a desperate, frantic scramble for cash. Madoff reached out to his wealthiest confidants, attempting to secure emergency capital injections to cover the mounting redemptions, but the global credit freeze made it impossible. On December 10, 2008, the facade finally cracked completely. Cornered by his inability to meet client demands and facing imminent exposure, he confessed the reality of his phantom empire to his family. The betrayal was absolute, severing decades of trust not only with his clients but with his own flesh and blood, who immediately turned him in to federal authorities. The subsequent arrest sent a seismic shockwave through the global financial system. The FBI raid on the Lipstick Building seized decades of fabricated records, confirming that the $64.8 billion in purported client wealth was a complete fiction. The legal retribution was swift and unprecedented in its severity. Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies, including securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. At the age of 71, he was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison, a symbolic term designed to ensure he would die behind bars, reflecting the catastrophic scale of his deception. The human wreckage left in the wake of the collapse was unfathomable. Thousands of individual investors, many of whom were retirees who had entrusted their entire life savings to the firm, were instantly rendered destitute. Beyond individual ruin, the blast radius decimated the philanthropic sector. Charitable foundations, universities, and hospitals that had relied on the supposedly steady returns to fund their operations were forced to slash budgets or close their doors entirely. The psychological toll of the betrayal drove some victims to suicide, underscoring the lethal reality of white-collar crime when executed on such a massive scale. In the aftermath, the monumental task of unwinding the financial labyrinth fell to a court-appointed trustee. A global forensic accounting effort was launched to trace the flow of stolen funds across international borders, offshore accounts, and complex corporate structures. Investigators painstakingly reconstructed decades of phantom trades to determine the actual cash-in and cash-out positions of every single investor. This forensic autopsy revealed that the actual principal invested and subsequently lost was approximately $17.5 billion, a figure distinct from the fabricated profits that had existed only on the 17th floor's dot matrix printouts. Recovering these lost billions required the implementation of aggressive clawback lawsuits. The trustee targeted investors who had unwittingly withdrawn more money than they had initially invested, classifying these withdrawals as fictitious profits derived from other victims' principal. This legal mechanism, while necessary for equitable redistribution, forced many individuals who believed they had legitimately profited years earlier to surrender their wealth. The clawback process highlighted the insidious nature of the fraud, where the financial contagion infected even those who had exited the fund long before its collapse. The investigation also exposed the profound complicity of major financial institutions that had served as the lifeblood of the operation. J.P. Morgan Chase, the primary banker for the firm for over 2 decades, processed billions of dollars in suspicious transactions without ever reporting them to authorities. Internal banking communications later revealed that executives harbored deep suspicions about the legitimacy of the returns, yet the bank continued to collect massive fees from the accounts. This institutional willful blindness demonstrated how the pursuit of profit routinely overrode basic compliance and ethical obligations within the highest echelons of global finance. The fallout forced a radical restructuring of financial oversight. In the wake of the scandal, the SEC underwent sweeping internal reforms to overhaul its enforcement division and modernize its risk assessment protocols. The disaster served as a primary catalyst for the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which introduced stricter regulations on investment advisors and mandated more rigorous auditing standards. The era of blind trust in charismatic financial figures was abruptly terminated, replaced by a renewed, albeit cynical, emphasis on transparency and independent verification. Yet, despite the exhaustive forensic analysis and regulatory overhauls, the psychological enigma of the architect remains a subject of intense scrutiny. How does a pioneer of electronic trading rationalize a multi-decade criminal enterprise? Prison interviews and psychological profiles suggested a man driven by a pathological need for approval and an absolute inability to admit failure. The fraud likely began as a temporary measure to cover short-term trading losses, but as the deficit grew, the lie became a permanent, inescapable reality. He compartmentalized the devastation he was causing, viewing his investors not as human beings with lives and futures, but as mere variables in a mathematical equation he could no longer solve. The legacy of the world's largest investment fraud is not merely measured in vanished billions or shattered regulatory frameworks. It is permanently etched into the collective psyche of the investing public as a stark warning about the lethal combination of greed, exclusivity, and unquestioned authority. The name Madoff has become synonymous with ultimate betrayal, a chilling reminder that the most dangerous predators do not operate in the shadows, but in the brightly lit boardrooms of the financial elite, armed with impeccable suits, quiet confidence, and a devastatingly simple promise that is too good to be true.